Hey there, and welcome back to the Total Potential Podcast. It's Cole. I'm really excited today to open some conversation on some topics we have not really spoken much about. And it's high time that we do because this is incredibly important work. And lucky for us, we have an expert. Amanda Gilchrist is a licensed and certified counselor and has tons of experience in multiple domains of the mental health care space. And she has some expertise on trauma and EMDR and working with couples. Hello. Super important work so that families can really operate from their highest and best level. And really, the only true way we can do that is to bring awareness to the places where maybe we have had traumas, big or small, and give ourselves a real fighting chance to heal those things and not pass them on to future generations. So I'm super thrilled to have Amanda here. Let's go ahead and welcome her to the podcast. Amanda, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and can't wait to jump in.
Yeah, I'm feeling like this is really a long overdue conversation on these topics. So I'm really super grateful to have you here. But before we do dive into some maybe heavier matters, curious to know, working in this space, it's a very dynamic space. What are some of the things that led you to want to be here and do this kind of work?
Yeah, I'd say that it was more that I was purposed to do this
Mm,
work. I absolutely can remember a couple of times, especially in my childhood. I had a very good childhood friend. We had the same birthday, hang out all the time, and that friendship ended in college, in my first year of college. I was actually in my undergrad getting my psychology degree. But one of the biggest realizations was that the way she had spoken, her dad had spoken to her over the years, he would give her everything and then just berate and demean her. And it just never sat well with me. And the way our friendship ended was like a direct reflection of her putting the things on me that he'd put
mm,
on her.
mm.
And so I think it's a combination of, my own personal experiences, friendships, and just the fact that I've always felt led to do this work and work in this space. Now, I can never say that trauma was the thing I thought I was going to be
Sure.
doing, right? I was like, crisis trauma? No, never. And that's the thing about when you're purposed to do something, right? You end up in it, whether you want to or not. And so it turns out the thing that I was so terrified of is the thing that I do most of the time now.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible? And I love that you highlight that it, you know, was something that had a little bit of fear around it, around being
Hmm.
in that space. Because I think for a lot of people, we feel that. We feel like
Hmm.
hesitant or, ooh, and that's not actually, and then all these things just keep leading us that way. And it takes so much courage to hop in and still do it,
Yeah.
even when it feels scary. So
Yes.
kudos to you. That's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. Trauma is some necessary work. And even though I'm not terrified to do it anymore, it still does take a lot to do. Because I think more of us are, suffering than we realize.
Yes, okay, and I'm so glad that we can have that as a little bit of a jumping off point because I think a lot of people when they hear the word trauma, they think like, well, I had a decent childhood, like I've had jobs, I'm married. Like they can't really think of a
Hmm.
quote unquote traumatic experience, especially not like a one time like I had a, catastrophic injury or a terminal illness in my family and those things I think people can, recognize really quickly.
Hmm.
But when you think of trauma, give us a little bit of like the spectrum. What kinds of things land on that experience of trauma that maybe not aren't those first couple of like huge events that might come to people's minds?
So I'd say that's a good question. When I'm actually discussing trauma, I like to say that there is like no one size fits all definition, right? It's really about the individual's experience. And so I'd say the parameters that you want to put around whether something you experienced was a trauma or not is an instance where there was this very quick change or adjustment, or something happened that you weren't prepared to respond to. Okay. It's almost like any instance where your response system was activated, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. I am terrified. I'm in a place of panic. I don't know what to do. I can't process what's happening. I don't know how to respond, right? It can be in any of those moments where we feel stuck. And so sometimes people will quickly think of trauma as like this big thing, right? 9/11, or we go extreme like with, sexual trauma. And here's the thing, right? Sexual harassment, where someone says something extremely inappropriate to you that may be in your line of supervision, that can be a traumatic experience for someone, right? Even a fender bender accident where you walk away just fine. Traumatic experience is about what you experience in that moment, your ability to respond to that and to process what's actually happened. And so one of the surefire ways I tell people that they know whether or not they've experienced trauma is usually what happens is if our mind doesn't have the opportunity to process that information in a healthy way, we end up creating reasons for why this thing happened, right? And those reasons are usually around only things we feel like we can control, which is ourselves. So now we create a belief about ourselves that says, well, if I would have, and if I had just, and if I wasn't doing this, right? It's all about me. If I was just perfect, if I was showing up this way, then none of this would have happened. And I guarantee you, every person can think of experiences in their life where they're taking on accountability for something that actually isn't anywhere remotely within their control.
Yeah, I love that definition. Gosh, because how many beliefs do we carry around, right, about things that should have gone differently? Or yeah, I just think that's a nuance I've never heard described before. So I really appreciate that. What about, for so many people, right? It's like early traumas, even though they might be small, are really almost outside of our memory. They're just things that we know, and they're just the quote unquote normalness of life. And, something like 1 in 4 children experience abuse. One in
Mhm.
four, like that's incredible. I mean, and so to think like and those are probably some pre-developmental, like I'm different than you. Like those are like subconscious kinds of memories. So what are some of the things people might do to recognize those earlier experiences that really aren't part of our cognition? They're part of our subconscious mind.
I am so glad you said that, because this is one of the things I say to advocate for the fact that anyone can benefit from therapy. All right. So very briefly, without like sounding too geeky, I'm going to say that when we are going, through life, right, our brain is developing, and our brain's primary goal is to protect us. And so, of course, like, we have our conscious and our unconscious mind, but a lot of the ways we make decisions, the things we do, all come from this mental roadmap that's in your unconscious mind. Okay. So when I say the phrase out loud, that most of the time we don't actively know what we're thinking about. It's true, because you have the things that are at the forefront that are like the right now, but then that unconscious mind is informing so much of everything. And so I want people to think of like, this is one of the main examples I use in saying like the power of suggestion, right? So you're sitting with someone and they're listening to music. You don't even like the song. You're barely even paying attention. You don't even really recognize it. But what happens later that day or the next day?
Songs like in your head.
You're singing the song and you're like, why am I singing this song? And you might not even recall where you heard it, but it lets you know that our brain is always taking in information. And so when we talk about those early experiences, I'm going to say most people are not going to be aware of those experiences unless they want to. Okay. Our mind, that's actually why we end up developing triggers. It's because we have experiences. And if we don't know how to process them in the moment, our brain stores them deep, deep, deep down in this hole. And if we don't process it, it festers. It's like throwing a bad seed in the ground and wanting something beautiful to bloom, but it only spreads. It kind of becomes this disease, right? And so anything can become a trigger, even things that weren't part of the initial experience. And so in childhood, right, your goal is to be able to live, right, to be happy. And your brain is working overtime to protect you. So it's just stuffing and stuffing and stuffing away. It's the point where we, quote unquote, forget about it. And it really takes time and awareness of self to do it, to become aware of those experiences. And not only that, some people have buried it so deep down that we end up having to do, they end up finding things out when they come to do trauma therapy, specifically EMDR, hypnosis, like things come up that they never realized were there. And so the thing I'm going to say is every single person has experiences in their childhood that informs how they respond, how they make decisions now, why they do the things they do. And so if you ever want to get curious about yourself, one of the first things you want to do is go and dig back into those early experiences. The only way to do that is to really allow yourself to be open to it. And most of us don't like to go there, right? It's the sitting with yourself that makes it difficult. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but it's definitely like some people might know enough of their childhood experience to pinpoint, and most of us are completely unaware.
Yeah. So, one reason I'm so thankful to have a chance to talk about this topic is my own interpretation. I hope, actually, I don't care if it's right or wrong. I'm interested to see what you have to say about it. But my own interpretation has been that, do traumas and triggers end up showing up out in the workspace or out in your friendships? Of course they do. But for the work that, so close to my heart, like if you want to see where the traumas are showing up, spend a little time in your family and in your marriage, because like we can't hide from what some of those behaviors and patterns end up being if we're willing to pay attention. Like, am I the person who's constantly blaming somebody else in my family? Am I the person who gets tripped and, really angry really easily? It's like if you look in the family, there's a lot of ways that these things become almost like the day-to-day normal way of interacting. And it's this huge opportunity because, my goodness, if we can go back and do some work and heal that trauma and identify what those traumas are and start clearing the system, like maybe our kids don't have to have that same experience, or maybe, right? And so what do you see as far as like how these traumas start to show up in the family and marriage?
See, you're spot on. It shows up in your everyday behavior. That's one of the places I tell people to start, right? If you want to know where things aren't going well, you don't look outside of you, you look inside, right? We tend to get into this reflective stage. And so I say, okay, it's nice to be reflective. That's a tiny level of awareness, right? That's a little bit. But I want you to think of reflective as like a mirror. So if you're standing in the mirror, all you see is the things on the surface. Oh, I can change this, I can fix that. And we all say it doesn't fix the inside, right? So it's the introspection that we need to be doing. It's that examination of your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And in order to do that, that requires you to some time to sit with yourself. The issue is a lot of times is that people are probably pointing out the things that they see inside of you, but generally it's like, you're judging me, you're defensive, you're attacking me. It's almost there, like we're in a place where we're trying to convince ourselves that other people are against us. And instead, maybe they're identifying things that they see happening inside of us. But we're not ready to have that conversation and maybe that level of realization. And then there's the I'm just being me. And so I love to say that there are way more people in this world who are living lives that don't belong to them than there are people who are living their own authentic life. And the reason I say it doesn't belong to them is because most times we're carrying on values and beliefs and patterns and behaviors, all that we've seen. And so if you think about the way you respond now, and this is why it's so important for our kids, right? If we're just passing that thing on, what are we giving our kids? We unintentionally repeat patterns. And if we aren't cognizant of like, I'm behaving this way because I choose to, or I'm behaving this way because that's what's been modeled for me, that those are two completely different, sides of the coin. So absolutely it starts in the family, but it starts with, I would say curiosity, right? It's not necessarily about like, sometimes we get hard on ourselves and we're like, I'm picking out flaws. Oh, I'm this horrible and I didn't know I was this bad. It's really just about being curious about yourself, wanting to grow, wanting to learn. All that said, right? It's more about being curious. And when we look at it as being curious instead of nitpicking ourselves, right? Instead of being a really tough critic, it allows you the space to give yourself a little bit more grace, right? Because we don't just do things out of nowhere, right? So I'm not saying that to say blame your experiences for how you behave, right? But you have something to track it back to. You get to say, wow, like I realized, personally speaking, this is my moment of transparency and authenticity, that I was experiencing daddy issues. And I didn't realize that fully until after I was married. Now, this is, of course, I was already a therapist then, but there were moments where, of course, we may bicker and, it's the like, well, my husband say, well, I'm just going to leave. And his leaving was like, he's going to go ride somewhere and then he's going to come back home.
Yeah.
But, I'll share like, this was like, in those moments, I would have this sigh of relief, right? Like I'd be sad, but I'd also be relieved because now I just get to, he was leaving anyway. Like I knew this was going to happen. And I really didn't realize for a long time that I was operating from that mindset that, well, he's going to leave anyway. So I'm unintentionally doing things. Or I'm just waiting. Like I'm just sitting on edge because he's going to leave. And then I'm like, aha, I knew it. You were leaving. And if we really took the time to take stock of how many beliefs that we carry and then our behavior perpetuates that, we're creating our life. We're creating our experiences that we despise. We're creating them over and over again unintentionally. So I'd say be curious.
Yeah. First of all, it's one of my all-time favorite words because it's so true. It's like, look at the landscape as if you know none of the answers and just, what could be there? Like, so it's such a freeing space. But I would just want to highlight another thing that you said about, the behaviors and do I feel like I'm choosing them or they're just happening, right? Because you hear that all the time. People will say like, oh, that's just the way I am. And it's like, well, is that the way you are because you choose to be that way? or because you feel like you're powerless in making a different decision. Those are very, very different ways of being.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of us, we just feel like, oh, well, that's my personality, kind of in to really just appreciate your moment of transparency. Like for the longest time, my thing would have been, I'm just really shy. Well, that's interesting. I don't actually want to be shy. So what is that, right? And it's like, well,
Mhm.
okay, that I could just say that's the way I am, but I wasn't opting into, like, that wasn't my choice to be that way. And so I just wanted to highlight
Mhm.
the really,
Yeah.
that's a huge word. Am I choosing it, or does it
Mhm.
feel chosen for me? And those are very different places to operate from.
Yeah. Yes. And interesting enough, sometimes we do think we're choosing it, right? So I've heard people like say to me before, well, I didn't choose to be this way. And I'm like, oh, maybe you did.
Mhm.
And so we start talking about values, and I'm like, okay, well, why do you think that means so much to you? And you'll find that we can't give an answer
Hmm.
because we inherited that value. Or that value is the exact opposite of what we've experienced. So I value
Yes.
this because this happened to me, right?
Yes.
And if I just don't want to be like my mom, or I just don't want to be like my dad. And if that's the standard, then are you choosing? Or you're just saying, I'm going to be the opposite of this, right? Is it something you really actually value? So we have to look at it. Am I choosing this because I value it? Or am I choosing it because it's the opposite?
Hmm.
And if you're choosing because it's the opposite of what you had, or you didn't want to be that way, then the choice was made for you, right?
Hmm.
It's not yours. You didn't say, I want to be like this because I love it, or I like it, or I desire it, or I value it. I just want this because it's the opposite of the horrible experience I had.
Yeah.
That's not a
Yeah,
good enough
that's
reason.
yeah. That's powerful. Okay, so some introspection, starting to look at, the thoughts, feelings, behaviors, the things that come up for you. Once somebody starts to like open the door on where these triggers might be, what some of these micro, macro, whatever size traumas they are, have been identified, like what happens next? What is somebody, because I think for a lot of people, that's kind of the scary tipping point is like, okay, well, I'm going to open this can of worms that's kind of uncomfortable for me to open to begin with. And then what?
Mhm.
So, what happens
Yeah.
next?
So the happens next is, I'd say you build a community of support. And I'm going to say that community of support starts with therapy, because although, we look at support as the people near us and close to us in those relationships, you know, we're not always necessarily equipped to be that kind of support, right?
Mm,
Or to carry the objectivity. There's always bias, which is why I'm an advocate for therapy. I don't care if you think you are the most sound, mentally well person there is, you can still benefit from therapy, because it's just a place of safety and objectivity, right?
mhm,
Where there's not these preconceived notions that you have to deal with. That is the perfect space for you to just be whatever, especially when you're trying to figure it out,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and I'll be transparent. I've had clients say to me before, like, I might ghost you because I've been to therapy before, and I feel like, you guys just bring up all these feelings and then you leave me with them and
Mm,
I don't know what to do with them. And I'm like, well, let's talk about that though. And so what changes in this process is we have to reevaluate how we're looking at feelings. We're so terrified, the pain is so bad, we just have this, I don't know, it's almost like we treat it like Armageddon, or we're going into civil war.
mhm,
And it's just this huge dark cloud of fear that comes with feeling feelings.
mhm,
And that's where I'm going to say start. When you open it up, it's time to get comfortable with your feelings and what they actually mean, right? That takes that curiosity to the next level. Well, what's influencing this feeling? Feelings don't just happen for no reason. They're valid. They're part of our response system. They help us to know if something's right or wrong or doesn't feel good. And for a lot of people, this is like unfamiliar territory because we're so used to like breezing by things, whatever, it is what it is, it's fine. You know, even when we ask people how they're feeling, oh, I'm good, right? Because we're naturally used to saying good. Good is not a feeling, right? It's a state, right? It's a trait maybe, but it's not a feeling. And so I'd say, no, what's a feeling word? Are you feeling disappointed? Are you feeling inspired? Are you feeling, there's so many things we can feel, but we don't know how to express them and we don't know how to attach words to them. And so I see why people are uncomfortable opening that up, right?
Yeah.
But the thing to do is to get comfortable with your feelings and recognize that they don't have the ability to significantly harm you unless you don't feel them. It's the stuffing them down that causes way more harm, whether that's how you respond to people. It could be your actual physical health, because holding things in is actually a real thing when it comes to our health, right? Our bodies are not made to carry that much stress. And each time that we deny ourselves the opportunity to feel, we're invalidating ourselves. We're diminishing our own worth. We're, not honoring ourselves. And then we wonder why we don't feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I feel like we could do like a whole entire episode just on this specific aspect. Like, what are the feelings? What does it feel like to feel them? Can you identify the words that go with them? Like, there's so much in our culture and society that just says like we get to be mad, neutral, or happy. Those are like the three
Exactly.
maybe acceptable.
Right. And I'm
And
like,
there's so much
no,
more.
so much more. I'm all over the place. As a matter of fact, I give clients a feelings wheel and like, just spin the wheel, pick a feeling, any feeling. What feeling do you feel? Right.
Totally.
And then validate that. Right. But we get into this mindset that, oh, that means I'm gonna wallow. And I literally just told a client this yesterday. I said, what's your definition of wallowing? And wallowing is more so about wanting to hold on to that feeling and trying to get, empathy or attention or anything like that for it. But most of us don't even wallow because we're trying to hurry up and pass the feeling. We're like
Yeah.
ignoring the feeling.
Yeah.
um,
There's an element of what you're saying that really feels like gaining a capacity to integrate our feelings, our states, our choices, our traumas, and not let them be that thing that just got like stuffed down and we're trying to avoid it at all costs. And I think all of us can recognize an experience for like, oh my God, I would never want to experience that again. And I hold it at like this arm's length, even inside of myself. So once they're identified, once we get into this feelings work, even start to explore what's there for us, like how do we start to integrate these experiences in a way where they aren't this thing that we're trying to hold so far away?
Yeah. Yeah. So I went back and got training in this for a couple of years, some years back, but EMDR. So EMDR for short, but it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so this was developed by Francine Shapiro, and I was so lucky to be able to be trained by a trainer who was trained by the actual developer, right?
Yeah.
So he was amazing. He's no longer with us, neither is she, but people call it the Jedi mind trick. They call it, hoodoo. And so I like to say it's none of that, right? It just takes natural systems that our body already uses to help us reprocess information. The biggest aspect of why trauma impacts us the way that it does is because when we don't process them, they get stored deep down. You have beliefs and triggers that are associated with that. And so EMDR really centers around focusing on what is the core belief that you carry from these different experiences. And there are generally 4 areas. So there's 2 areas like that are about responsibility. And then there's another area about safety and security. And the other is about control. Now, the 2 areas about responsibility, one is about action, like I should have done something. And the other one is like defectiveness, as if like something's wrong with me.
Mm.
And that's the reason I'm taking responsibility. But I can tell you, pretty much every person can identify at least one core belief that they have in any of those 4 areas. Some people have multiple, some people have them in different areas, right? And those core beliefs really inform how we respond to particular things. If you took the time to identify some of the same cycles you go through, you'll notice that there's usually a negative core belief that circles that, whether it's I have to be perfect and please everyone, whether it's worthiness, whether it's I should have this or that, but we carry those with us. And so EMDR essentially takes our brain's natural ability to process information, and we jumpstart that process in a session. And we call it bilateral stimulation, but all it says is we're going back and forth, right? So you're either following fingers, you're following a light bar. I generally use audio where you can hear the sound go back and forth. So it's activating the movement of your right and left brain. That's how our brain processes information, okay? And so I literally take them through these sets of stimulation where in the beginning we're bringing up the feeling and bringing up the experience and allowing them to fully sit with that, and then give your brain the space to reprocess it. And you'd be amazed at how much can happen in one session. You know, I've had people say to me, oh my goodness, I didn't think I was going to feel any better. I didn't think I was going to feel any different. But it's about setting up the expectation. What EMDR does is actually helps you reprocess information that was stored in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
So that you can store it in a healthy way. The reason that it stays unhealthy is because we have this emotional attachment to it. And so EMDR works to decrease that emotional charge that's attached to it. So now the chance that something else is true is 10 times more believable, right? We're not holding on to that belief with dear life anymore. And so when we talk about beliefs, I always tell people the reason that it's so important a lot of times to reprocess is because sometimes we don't know how much we're attached to a particular belief, right?
Sure.
And how much of our identity lies in that particular belief. But that belief then dictates what you do.
Yeah,
And
like
how you respond.
everything. Yes.
It becomes like you're a person. Like imagine, I always tell people, negative beliefs, right? The reason that they can live on is because we continue to gather evidence about this one instance, even though there's 85 instances that refute it, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're the person with a dart and everything looks like a bullseye now. And so if that's the thing I've experienced and that's the thing that I'm holding on to, I'm going to point out everything that proves my theory is right. And so we're reprocessing that so that you're not so focused on the negative thing that proves your theory right, but instead able to accept all the other evidence that says that's not true.
Yeah. Okay, so how does one find someone who can help them? First of all, is this a kind of practice that can be done in a virtual setting? Because I think for a lot of people listening, it's like, I live in a town of a few thousand people and I'm not sure there's an EMD practitioner in my neighborhood. So, like, where does one start
Yes.
to navigate if
Yeah.
this is an appropriate therapy for them?
Yeah, so they're not everywhere. And here's what I'm going to say. You definitely have some people out there who are adamant that it can only be done face to face. But I have successfully done it face to face and virtually, and I've actually been doing it longer virtually than face to face.
Mm,
And I have seen amazing changes for the people that have done it. And I'll say it doesn't work for everybody. But I will say the biggest difference is that what I've noticed is that if it doesn't work for someone, is because they're not allowing themselves to really sit with the feelings, right? You have to lean into them. Like I'll be in the middle of doing a processing with someone and I'll pause them and I'll have them lean into, so this set, I want you to lean into this fear that's holding you back from getting to the thing that
mm,
you want to get over,
mm,
right? Because sometimes we will unintentionally block ourselves from leaning fully into that experience because we don't want to feel it. And so I make this one promise. I promise you that if you allow yourself to fully experience and embody the feelings that you've been carrying, that it will be 10 times easier to work through them
mm.
if you just sit in that discomfort for a moment. Um, and so you can do it virtually, absolutely. The EMDRIA organization, which is the one who does, if you're going to, for therapists out there, if you're ever going to get trained by someone who is EMDRIA certified. That's emdria.org. But you can also look on that website to find therapists who have been trained and who have been certified. Now, what I'll say is, the only difference between someone who has been trained and who has been certified is the certification just means that they verified that you got an extra certain amount of hours of consultation with a consultant. And truth be told, I've done like 40, 50 hours of extra consultation. I just haven't gone for the certification yet. But the most important thing is to know that anyone who is EMDR trained specifically by an EMDR approved organization is able to do EMDR therapy for you. Now, while I'm able to usually take on clients and just do EMDR with them and have them return to their therapist of record, it still is important for you to have a connection with the person you're doing it with, because this is like, you're going to fully embody your feelings now. So you need to feel
Yeah.
safe and secure with whoever that is. So that doesn't mean everybody's going to work for you. Still make a choice that feels good to you. But there are several therapists out here who do it virtually. And I have had success doing it virtually. And EMDRIA does also offer some literature and training on doing EMDR virtually. Yeah. So, and
Okay.
I'm not going to lie, I think that it's better virtually because it allows the individuals to be in their own space. And
Yeah.
so I will tell, because even when I used to do it in the office, I had weighted blankets, my lighting looked a certain way. And so I always say, like, get comfortable. We're doing EMDR. I want you to get very comfortable in a space that feels safe and cozy to you, whatever smells.
Mm,
Those things are so important when you're sitting in a space where you're going to bring up all of these feelings that you've been avoiding.
yeah.
So being in your
Yes.
safe space helps.
Yeah. And okay, give a little bit of insight because let's say, somebody, this maybe feels like a new recognition. Like, oh, interesting. Maybe I've never been to a therapist before, or like, wow, I never even thought of that experience as a traumatic event in my life. A little bit of insight between like talk therapy and, you know, using that methodology and this other like EMDR feels much more like neuro pathway situation from
Hmm.
how I
Hmm.
understand it. So how do these things work together?
Yeah. So what I would say is that talk therapy, while it's, been around forever and it's definitely good, EMDR is more evidence-based, right?
Mm,
So we can probably make a bigger stride quicker with EMDR, but the way that complements with talk therapy is still digging through some of the other things, right? So EMDR helps you reprocess a lot of those memories. It helps you to establish new beliefs. But talk therapy is definitely really good for exploration, right? And digging a
mm.
little deeper, consciously learning how to consciously dig a little deeper, right? So in EMDR, we're using your unconscious state, even though you're not unconscious,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I say, let your brain go where it goes instead of trying to control where it goes. Because if
Mm,
you try to control where it goes, it's not going to work, right?
yes.
So just let your brain do its thing. But the talk therapy piece requires a little bit more awareness. And I think in that regard, talk therapy is always beneficial in getting individuals very comfortable in digging deeper
Mm,
and really learning to set good boundaries, that place of just appreciation for who you are authentically. Because I never met anyone that came out of EMDR like able to like set really good boundaries, right? They
mm,
had a super emotional relief, right? But there are some things that require practice, and boundary
sure.
setting is usually one of those things we have to go back to because those beliefs that we carried would not allow us to set good boundaries, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
talk therapy complements like propelling you forward after you're kind of getting rid of those things that held you back for a really long time.
Yeah. So I have heard stories of people like literally needing one session of EMDR and having like tremendous transformation, but a little bit of insight. Is this normally like a 1-2 time thing? Is this a 10-12 time thing? Like, what does that look like for somebody who's maybe wondering, what the course of exploring EMDR
Yeah.
might look like?
So it's going to look a little bit different for each person. Just to give you some context, so for quite a while, I used to do post-critical incident seminars, which was for law enforcement. They would come from all different states to South Carolina, and they'd share their stories on day one of like these line of duty incidents or big traumatic incidents they had. And generally, we do about 30 minutes with them and follow up even a year after, and they'd be still feeling a lot better.
Hmm.
Um, but also, it makes a difference on when, right? So when the incident occurred, if we're going into early childhood, and there's some things you don't remember, those things might, take a little bit more time to
Sure.
process. It really varies. And so, yes, I've had people who 1 or 2 sessions and they're good. I have people who may be in it for 6 weeks, and we might do 2 EMDR sessions a week. And every now and then I'll do an EMDR clinic where we just kind of take a week or two, and depending on how much trauma you have, because it really depends on the traumatic experiences. So
Sure.
in the beginning, we're going back and listing out all the things that have happened. And even if you don't have a particular experience, there's a core belief or this internal feeling that sticks with you. We can usually work with that too,
Hmm.
to begin processing. So it really depends on how many layers we're going here.
Sure.
I'm going to tell anyone who decides to come to me, I start with the most traumatic thing. I'm going to have you to rate them all. But I start with the most traumatic thing because a lot of times you'll find there's some resolution for some of the others
Sure.
in the very, very, very big thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, that wasn't like a like for certain answer,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just gonna depend on your experiences. But it's not one of those things where you should be in therapy for a year or even more than 3 months,
Sure.
honestly.
Okay. Okay. That's incredible to think like, wow, if I really committed to this for, just even a few months of my life, like I could have a totally different not only life experience, but the way I feel inside day to day,
Uh-huh.
which is an
Uh-huh.
incredible wow, gift to yourself, gift to everyone around you. Like
Hmm.
that's a power move. Okay. Okay, so if somebody's like, "Ooh, hey, I really like these things Amanda's talking about," where would you recommend people find more about you, learn more about the different types of, I mean, you have some cool stuff that you're doing. So where can they learn more about Amanda?
Yeah, so you can always, it's so probably easy to get to me on social media. I'm pretty
Okay.
much on every channel as at Amanda Gilchrist _ LPC. And if that doesn't work, you can go to Amanda Gilchrist LPC info.
Okay.
And yeah, find me there in any of my links, and you'll see I'm getting into the habit of doing more lives. So I do lives related to mental health. I think earlier this week I did one for the truth about boundaries, and
Mm.
just, digging into what it means to set boundaries, why they actually are important for your physical and mental health, some signs that you may not be setting good boundaries. And sometimes we are unaware of the signs. So
Yes.
I'm trying to bring more awareness to the cause. So if you or anyone could benefit from any of that, just, follow me. You'll see it on my socials and send me a message. I'm always open to hearing what people want to hear back about. One of the things that has always stuck with me is no matter what I'm doing, I'm always making time to give people more information
Mm.
about their mental health and just closing the gaps in access, and just getting rid of the stigma. Because listen, I don't care what anyone says. They can say therapy is for the weak, but you've got to be really brave to come sit
Yes.
with yourself. And let's just say COVID made a lot of us sit with ourselves that weren't prepared to. And so if you struggled, then it's not easy
Yeah.
to sit with yourself, right?
Yeah. And I must say, like in my coaching experience, I'm noticing um, almost more challenge now in some of
Mm-hmm.
the mental health. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think there were some seeds that ended up being planted during COVID related to
Mm-hmm.
isolation and uncertainty. And, maybe you did really get really sick. Um, and I think for the longest time, people felt like, well, they could see the cause. Like, oh, it's this thing that's happening. And when that's over, I'll be on the other
Mm-mm.
side of that. And I mean, here we are 3 years later. And I know a lot of people really struggling almost more now than they were at
Mm-hmm.
any point during the pandemic. So, yeah, if you hear any of yourself in any of that, like it is
Yes.
brave to get help and support. Really brave.
It is. It is. And connection.
Mm.
So we struggled during COVID because of the lack of connection, but we never really got back
Yeah,
into
never
that
put it back.
afterwards.
I know.
So yeah, I'm just happy to be here today. Thank you so much for having me and just allowing me to, have these tough conversations that we sometimes run away from. And interesting enough, it's like I love going for the tough conversations because it's an opportunity for growth, right? And if you look
Yeah.
at it as an opportunity of growth rather than a very hard thing, your perspective shifts a little bit.
Mm, that feels like a nice spot to leave this. Thank you so much, Amanda, for being here today. We'll share all of the places to find you in our show notes. And thanks to everyone listening. Super appreciate your time, and we'll catch you all next time.